Hi, hello and good evening. My name is John Whipple. I'm with People Before Profit's Trade Union Department, and this is home working. We're going to talk about home working tonight. It's a great pleasure to have a number of excellent panelists with us here, and I'm just going to go through and quickly introduce everybody. Starting with myself, my name is John, and I work in the Trade Union Department in People Before Profit. We've run a few of these workers' forums, and tonight's the first time that we're running a panel discussion. We've had of expert or interesting researcher speakers and things like that, like Eric Blanc, who wrote Red State Revolt. We had Jane Hardy on a month and a half ago, and you can find her talk on the People Before Profit website. But tonight we've got three speakers, two of which are members of ours as People Before Profit, and two coming in from outside to talk about what is probably the biggest change that's happened to the Irish world of work since, for a very long time. And that's remote working. So joining us tonight first is Shanna Cohen. Shanna Cohen is from TASC, the Think Tank for Action on Social Change. She's a director of TASC, and she's been there since 2017. I first ran into her when she was presenting a talk on a talk that TASC did on precarious lives and precarious work, which tied in really nicely to our last talk, which is about organizing precarious workers and how that happens. Her research that TASC has done and the work that TASC continues to do is helpful in shaping progressive minds around Ireland. And if you haven't visited and dipped into their research library, you should. There's always something good for trade unionists. Secondly, we're going to talk with Gareth Murphy. Gareth Murphy works for the Financial Services Union, the FSU. They have a bunch of interesting projects, including, I believe, the Game Workers Union. They organize, I think, animators as well, and a few animators that I know here in Dublin with the excellent tax breaks that Ireland's tax regime gives them means that this is a growing field of young precarious workers as well, and it takes us back to the last time. So if you do want to talk a bit more about that, learn a bit more about that, or even look back at some of the talks that we did in October, please look back into our People Before Profit library and see the stuff on that. But Gareth is the head of industrial relations, I believe, and is head of campaigns, or he's also he likes to just be known as just a regular trade union officer, but he's a fairly friendly trade union officer. And if you haven't met him at any of the good left-wing union events that are going on in the city, get out there next year, and hopefully with COVID and injections and things like that, we'll all be meeting up and talking again. Finally, on screen, you can see Mehmet Uladag, who's a fairly prominent member of People Before Profit and a great trade unionist, good militant trade unionist who is on the Irish Executive Council for Unite and is the Black, Asian, Ethnic Minorities rep at the moment on the IEC. He's also a workplace rep and just a good place to go for advice for a lot of people in People Before Profit on trade union issues. And we also have Susan Parler. Now, we can't see her on the screen at the moment, but Susan Parler is vice president of the NEU in the North, and she's been an active trade unionist for 15 years, and she's a practicing teacher. She's a trade union rep in her school in Derry, and hopefully, even with the little tech issue that might be holding us up here, she'll be joining us in a few minutes. She's also a member of People Before Profit, and she is working very consistently to bring the plight of education workers and their pupils to public attention. She's also been very helpful in getting us involved in the organizing work that is going on online at the moment. There's a fantastic course that's running online globally. It's called Organizing for Power, and we've got a group of People Before Profit trade unionists and activists who are joining that, and a lot of those guys will be joining us tonight and watching back later. So I'd like to get started here, talking a bit about about remote work and home working. It was actually an idea that's come up through talks with Mehmet, and one of the major things is that it's something that's affecting almost every single person in Ireland. We've got somebody living at home who's working full time. So it's an enormous issue, and it's of course been studied a bit. This week, RTE ran a report on a survey that was out, and I don't know if any of our three panelists that are here at the moment would like to speak to that survey a bit and talk a bit about it. But there were 6,400 people surveyed, and it seemed very positive. The big headline figure from RTE says 95% of people like home working, and 32% want to continue working from home. And so it seems like home working's paradise, and I just want to see if anybody could speak to that maybe a little bit and talk about anything that came out of the survey for them. Would anyone like to kick us off here? Gareth, I see you lean forward, so get in there and lean in. Go on.
Grant, thanks very much, John. Yeah, I suppose, I mean, people were obviously thrown into home working in very unusual circumstances, very difficult circumstances for a hell of a lot of people. But I think what the survey did show is that there's a lot of people who have benefited from home working, and there's a lot of people who would like to continue some form of home working in the future. But that doesn't necessarily mean that everything involved in home working is wonderful and that home working is some kind of paradise, just because people don't necessarily want to be in the office under the watchful eye of their boss the entire time, and doesn't necessarily mean that home working is perfect and without its faults. And I think one of the reasons that home working is likely to stay in some form or other over the next number of years is that actually it has massive benefits for employers, and that's why, you know, it wasn't 3 or 4 months into the pandemic before we started to hear employers saying, do you know what, I think this is going to be here to stay. We're going to look at hybrid models. And indeed, some of the big employers around Dublin started selling off properties before the pandemic was halfway through. We're not even out of it, and they've started selling off properties and are only too keen to keep people at home. So you have to ask yourself what benefit they're gaining, and obviously the benefits are pretty clear in terms of reduced rent for employers, massive cost savings in terms of facilities and retail properties, etc. But also that they transfer a lot of costs and a lot of risks onto workers, and there's a massive transfer of utility costs and of associated risks and workplace risks onto workers as well. And I think that while I absolutely support people's right to set location, and I think people should have the right to request and the right indeed to set their place of work, I think that they should be compensated for utility bills, for electricity, for broadband. And then how do you actually quantify the fact that employers are occupying and colonizing part of your home? They're taking over part of your home space, and I think that has to be compensated in some way. All of this cost savings should be taken by employers.
All right. Yeah. And none of that is really covered in the survey itself. I thought it was interesting who put out the survey as well, but I don't know if anybody else wants to speak to that. Shauna, did you have any? Did you manage to see that survey this week when it was out at all? Or Mehmet?
Yeah, I followed it. So I thought it's positive in the sense that people want the flexibility and they don't want the long commute to work, and I think that that is helpful. That's good for people's well-being. But I would agree about the colonizing your home space. But I'd also, and I think you and I talked about this, the problem with like jumping up and down about home working is that it refers to a particular segment of the workforce. And within that workforce, we could talk about this when we talk about unionization as well. Yeah. So there are people like I personally, I live in a place that is spacious enough so that my 2 children and my husband, who's also working from home, we don't totally bump into each other all the time. But a lot of people, particularly in places like Dublin, don't have that kind of accommodation. They are in tight quarters. And if you have children who, you know, there's no separation between family life and your work life. And I think that can become quite stressful. But also, if you're not living in nice accommodation or your housing situation is precarious, then that's a stress that that the employer, since they want you to work at home, then they now should be invested in you having a decent home environment. And I think that is an area where unions could become involved. because, if you're asking somebody to work at home, then you should help provide for a decent home. But the other side of that is all the workers who cannot work at home. What's going to happen to their status and how they're treated and their well-being? And I think that that's an issue. That segregation between workforces that we should think about going forward.
Yeah, that's those are all incredibly salient points, especially for myself. I love talking about myself in these little interviews here, but as you can see, I'm in my bedroom. I don't have an office here, and I've got a 5-year-old who's waiting downstairs for this all to finish. And we've been trying to work like this for I don't know how long. It seems like an eternity now, and I can't imagine having a workspace of my own anymore. So yeah, these are all very real and salient issues for everyone. Mehmet, did you want to come in on that at all? Did you look at the survey?
I did very briefly, and I think the results are not surprising in a sense. I mean, we probably know from our own circles, from our own environment, that it has been somewhat positive in the first instance anyway, and it has been somewhat sort of also, there has been some challenging aspect to it as well, but the result is not surprising. I think the reality about home working is it is not a new concept really, but what COVID and the pandemic has brought on us is actually a very fast track transition from a long debated concept. Home working, hot desking, things like that have been, especially in specific sectors where workers could actually work remotely rather than being gathered in a workplace in a traditional sense. And it has been sort of fast-tracked reality for many of us. And I think we need to also look back and see why some of this positivity may be the case. Obviously, for certain sectors, working from home was an option. For certain other sectors, unemployment was the reality with the COVID, basically, right? Unless you're a frontline worker, unless you're a health service worker, unless you're stocking the shelves of a supermarket, which actually we should be grateful to some of these frontline workers who haven't got the recognition over the for many years. Suddenly we have seen these people becoming really important for society to function. But for those who were able to work from home, at least the daunting fear of losing your job or your income has not been the case, and I think that's good. That's positive. We need to certainly. I'm one who benefited from that, obviously, right? Working from home, basically. But I think obviously the commute, especially in Ireland, where the public transport isn't the best, traffic queues and long hours of waiting in traffic queues has been not been the case. Obviously, the whole idea of running from your workplace to your childminder, collecting the kids, dropping them to school in the morning, and all of that panic world that has been the reality for many workers has not been the case necessarily. But as time progressed, I think there has been some other things evolving in all of that. The first, what I call the honeymoon period, however challenging it may have been, have suddenly surfaced the realities of home as a place for private life has also become a place of employment, of work, basically. And that brought all the challenges I think one had to face. And I think those challenges have become, in many cases, in terms of childminding, in some other case, space, living conditions, then the bills, heating, electricity. And the mere fact that you, when you are at home, were using your screen for Facebook, YouTube, or whatever, watching films, is suddenly not the case. You're actually very seriously working from home as a professional. So all of these challenges mixed with very positive elements of it have now created a sort of a complex environment, which I think needs to be looked at in further detail. And I think as a long-term reality for many workers, or some at least, the home working will have to be looked at in great many detail, and a lot of aspect of home working will have to be further discussed and debated. And I think then some legal framework around it, protection of workers, protection of one's rights have to be part of this debate, because again, part of this quick transition, initially a lot of things had to be naturally or whatever, right, or maybe put aside, but now comes the time to look at it and just say, how do we put a framework around working from home, and how do we make sure that people who are willing to do so have the flexibility, have rights and have the protection like one would have, for example, in a traditional workplace, including health and safety, for example, including Working Time Act. And I think there are good examples out in the industry, which I believe there has been sort of a attempt to normalize the working from home with some measures taken either by the employers or by the trade union or workplace branches, etc. But there's, I'm sure, out there a lot of issues for a lot of people that haven't yet surfaced and that are not part of the debate. So maybe a survey should be done on costs, on living space, on housing realities, and the result may not be that positive. But overall, I think it's not one size fits all. I think there's a diverse range of views, opinions, and it seems the general sentiment is home working is not all bad or absolutely brilliant either.
Yeah, well, I think that's something that we're all going to coalesce around. But I think what you've hit on there, Mehmet, about needing to run a more, a whole worker focused survey would be really welcome. And I don't know, maybe there's a project for task, perhaps, Shana, you get some bright spark to take a look at the whole worker and home working. But that's not my place there. But maybe I'd like to move on to kind of start in on some of the questions that I was thinking I'd like to hear discussed at a forum such as this. Number one would be about inequality. People Before Profit is, just from the name itself, we're deeply concerned about the growing inequality. I heard in a class last night that in the United States there was a new billionaire created every, I think it was 80 hours or something like that in the United States during the COVID period. It's the inequality has drastically increased with billionaires, tripling their wealth and things like that in some cases. But on the smaller scale here in Ireland, some people simply have more going on at home. And I don't know if, Shana, we were speaking a little bit about that. Could you speak to that point a little bit about inequality and how COVID has either affected that in a positive or a negative way, and why you might think that? Or maybe get some comments on afterwards.
Well, if you look at the recent data, especially like from ESRI, the young people have been affected the most. Young people, maybe single parents, have been affected the most in terms of employment. Like Mehmet was saying earlier, if you're age 15 to, let's say, 29, the likelihood of you losing your job is much greater than if you're older. And those people are in public-facing jobs, so they're in retail, hospitality, etc. So the risk in Ireland is that a workforce that was already not doing great, if you look at the structure of the Irish economy, you have the high-tech or financial services workforce that can work at home and probably have a decent home to work in, and paying the utility bills or paying extra electricity or paying extra gas because you're heating your house is not going to hurt them as much as it would other people who are unable to pay for or not living in as nice living accommodation. But my concern in terms of inequality is not just income inequality. It's the fact that people's lives are going to become increasingly segregated in terms of their quality of life and their life opportunities. And it's intergenerational, and it's interethnic, and it's gendered. And I think that that's a dangerous position for Ireland, because even before the pandemic, there was this division between indigenous businesses who are relying upon low-paid workers and largely not unionized. And then you have the financial services, or you have high tech, and they may have precarious workforces, but they earn a lot more money. And my concern is that segregation will just continue going forward. But it's a political minefield for the government, and I hope that they're up for dealing with it. And that, I think, is, if you're talking about unionization, I think that that's an opportunity for unions to get involved, particularly with young people, because I'm not sure who's championing their future opportunities.
Well, yeah, Mehmet, would you like to come in and speak to that, or Gareth? Maybe Susan? We haven't heard from you yet. Now, Susan's, I'm just going to heads up everybody, Susan's going to leave her camera off here because there's a little bit of a problem with the camera. It's a bit distracting. So, Susan, did you want to speak at all to the point of inequality there? If not, that's fine.
Can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
Okay, that's great.
Great, yeah.
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, thanks for joining us too. Sorry about the tech problems.
Oh, that's fine. I can breathe again now. This was kind of when I was looking at this question today, I was looking at it in terms of broader things like in lessening. Has home working deepened or lessened inequality? And I just went back to kind of the idea of the whole employment structure, the way it's structured and rooted as it is within the kind of the capitalist system. It's based on inequality and exploitation to begin with. And so therefore, the bosses are ultimately work life. If they're working in the office or if they're working from home, it's not going to impact on them too negatively. I mean, as Mehmet has pointed out, and you've pointed out as well, from what I could gather, it's the people at the top are making more and more out of this, crisis, and those at the bottom are being kind of, hammered, and they're suffering. I suppose in terms of, the ability to work at home as well, the professionals will be more well equipped to work from home, while those who are working in kind of, retail or, the lower end jobs, those that pay less, they're going to be furloughed and thus losing a kind of 20% of their income, which they can ill afford to do. So, I mean, that's a major concern. And the equipment as well, in terms of not everyone will get the same equipment. I mean, I know as teachers, we weren't provided with any equipment at all whatsoever. Pupils were provided with equipment, but teachers had to pay. We had one teacher in my school working on a Kindle, trying to deliver, education on a battered Kindle. Yeah. I kid you not. We have 7-year-old iPads, and that's what we were supposed to deliver, remote learning to. So professionals, for the most part, can work from home. Accountants, solicitors, they'll be all fine. The rest of the workforce, well, that's where the real problems are. I did read an article today whereby this woman, Brianne Kimmel, who's a Silicon Valley venture capitalist, she was promoting the death of the workplace, and instead she was suggesting that if we don't have offices, we're not going to have the types of problems that comes with the work culture, such as harassment and bullying and sexual harassment and all of these things. But she's, at the end of the day, I couldn't see her point, and she is peddling her own kind of market here as well. So that was just another. Yeah, no, and
I think that reflects a lot of what Shauna was saying there. I think your point about the equipment is, that might be a minor point for you, but I do remember as I was driving out and away from my workplace for the last time, what was it, on the 13th of March, I think it was, seeing staff unload computers and 5-point office chairs into their cars, taking them out of their own offices and setting up those home offices. I assume they're setting them up in their own workplaces. Whereas my job, I didn't have a personal computer. Mine was always a shared workspace. My personal computer was going to become my new office. I had no choice in that and no alternative, and it simply was not up to scratch. And that was the way it was for almost everybody I worked with. They were thrown into improvising on behalf of the company, and there was never an offer to buy equipment. There was never an offer for any of that to happen. They were just expecting people to fall away, and that was simply it. So, I mean, I'm very happy with the pandemic unemployment payment, but I think it leaves us in a bad spot. The other point that you make there with the girl boss example there of Brianne Kimmel about the end of bullying and workplace problems, I think that's something that really that brings us right to the next question, was if home is the new workplace, how do we talk about health and safety? It is a really broad question here, and I'd love to hear Mehmet come in on this one, Gareth come in on this. And Mehmet especially wanted to talk about this, but I think Gareth, you have quite a number of views from all the contacts you get from inside your membership there. So Mehmet, could we go to you first and then maybe to Gareth?
Yes, indeed. I think health and safety, and that's actually linked to general discussion on inequality as well, a worker's ability to perform their job in an environment which is healthy and safe in every meaning of the word is very important. And I think health and safety, first of all, I think we need to recognize that whether we are working from home or in an office or in a factory, the health and safety rules and regulations are the same, should be the same. And again, there has been very good examples and bad examples of that. And I have seen attempts where health and safety has been put to the forefront and taken care of over time. And I have also seen examples where it hasn't been the case. I have listened to some people who talked about some very bad stories, and people who spoke about good attempts to make health and safety an important aspect. I think it's very important that this is again taken care of, that it's not left to individual improvisation of it, because you wouldn't see that in the workplace, that health and safety is just a matter for individuals to take care of. It's a system that has to be in place, and it's a systematic arrangement. And I think safeguarding of all of these will have to be in place. It could be physical space, it could be the environment in general, it could be living conditions in general, and indeed it could be anything that has physical, personal, health-related matters as far as the worker is concerned. I think it is going to be an increasingly important topic, because of the speedy transition into this, some of these things wouldn't be necessarily in the forefront of people's thinking, but now is the time, I think, where health and safety is probably entering people's mindset, and it's more in the consciousness. So this is an important area for organized workers unions to look at, get up to speed, and also put pressure on a legal framework around that, and make sure that health and safety gains so far are not reversed, and indeed advanced to take care of the new reality. That's going to be very important in the near future, I think.
Yeah, that's it. I think it's interesting the thing you said about health and safety can't be improvised. Health and safety, physical health and safety, I suppose, was improvised for a number of years, and it led to all kinds of problems, and we needed a systemic approach. And that's one of those things that trade unions have been really helpful in putting in place and ensuring and enforcing in a lot of cases through training and effective, organization on the work site. Gareth, have you got anything to say on health and safety and how that's going to be implemented if people are working at home? Inspections, do things like that happen? Are they merited? Any concerns?
Yeah, thanks. So I think health and safety is a good example of what unions can do collectively in workplaces, but also politically through legislation. But actually, they don't necessarily cater for the inequalities that exist in society and that are exposed in things like home working. So, for example, absolutely in heavily unionized private sector workplaces where I would be involved in some of them, we negotiated health and safety agreements in late March, where equipment was sent out to workers and couriered out to workers who were working from home. So that included VDUs and mouse and keyboards and the plastic, unfortunately, tablets that computers sit on, and then chairs, etc. And we would have been fairly successful in negotiating the transport of them, including new laptops and things like that, out to workers through our collective bargaining and through our collective agreements. And that's a good thing. And obviously, as Mehmet said, the legislation that we have also caters for health and safety assessments, ergonomic assessments, all of that, and they can be carried out by Zoom, and they can be carried out by telephone now as well, and digitally. So all of that still applies and should be done and have to be done. However, what that doesn't tailor for and doesn't compensate for is structural inequalities in society and inequalities in housing and accommodation. So if you have an appropriate workspace that can be tailored for equipment and chairs and things like that, that's fantastic. But if you're in a flat and you're sharing that, and in reality you're essentially working from the end of your bed, or from 2 or 3 people sitting at a kitchen table trying to share that space, there's not actually much that can be done through equipment to compensate for the fact that you're in shared accommodation and you don't have the luxury of some of the housing that other people have in society. So while legislation and collective bargaining is fantastic and it mitigates some of the worst aspects, it doesn't actually deal with the broader political questions of inequality in society. And there's also more than just the space that we exist in terms of society, but also there's the question of things like domestic violence. And we often forget that going into work for some people could have been the escape from domestic violence situations. And now, when they're working from home, there is no escape. They are effectively trapped. And so the extension and unions have a big role to play to ensure that domestic violence, as an example, is also the responsibility of the employer to ensure that correct policies and procedures are in place to protect people. And trade unions should be making these demands. And that's where the whole question of home working becomes a much bigger and broader issue for trade unions to mobilize around and to seek to negotiate industrial agreements and collective agreements, but then politically mobilized to get legislation. And the last point just I'd make is that when we talk about health and safety, we almost always gear ourselves towards equipment and kind of the physical environment, but obviously the mental environment is huge. And you know, what the working from home has really exacerbated. We already had an always on culture, which was challenging people's ability to disconnect on the weekend and after hours, etc. But working from home has exacerbated that and intensified it significantly. And all of the surveys for working from home identify work intensification as a real issue. And that's essentially the increased exploitation of labor by capital and bosses getting more out of you. And so that's why things like the right to disconnect are even more important now. That ability to turn off when you finish your shift and not be contacted out of hours, or to be paid for that work outside of hours, and for people to be paid for work that they do before work if they log on early, but also that people have the right to take their full lunch break and say no to meetings if people put meetings in their diary. You know, between 12:30 and 1:30 when they're on their lunch, they have the right to say no and not be victimized, not, you know, fail to get a promotion because your employer thinks that you're dossing, but in effect you're taking your entitled lunch break. So health and safety is a lot bigger just than the kind of trips and slips that we sometimes think of. There's also the mental aspect is really important.
Yeah, I don't know anybody who hasn't come forward with a story about the fact that they just can't seem to get anything done. I remember, you know, I think everybody does, probably some nice Wednesday morning back in April or May last year saying, oh my God, I don't have to go in there this morning, and just thinking what a dream this all was. But then, you know, 100 nights in a row staying up late working on stuff and thinking I can get this done too. And it is very difficult to manage. The right to disconnect legislation was really helpful. I have to say, once again, on personal experience, my wife has said that it has had an effect in her workplace, not in a serious way with enforcement, but it's laid down that marker and allowed for a conversation space with her and her other co-workers, where they can talk about the fact that, yeah, this doesn't and shouldn't be happening, or it you know, it shouldn't be happening, and this is what we can do about it. And they can bring that up with managers in a kind of really gentle way, saying things like, so what does this mean for us? And it does help them revisit that. So there's that little psychological boost from the right to disconnect. But I'd like to talk a bit more about that. And I'd like to take us on to the next point, if we could. What do workers' organizations need to do? Now, obviously, the easy person to go to on this would be kind of somebody who works for a trade union. But I'd like to hear more from, say, Susan, and from Shauna and Mehmet, actually, on this one. What do we think the unions need to do in terms of organizing? What Gareth was saying there about legislation and negotiations, those are in workplaces that already have established relationships with a trade union, a recognition agreement where they could bargain like that. Most workplaces in Ireland don't have recognition agreements. Most workers work in small employments and they won't get those things. There isn't trade union recognition in Ireland. We have a huge way to go in the South, at least. So could we talk a little bit about trade union organizing with home working, and maybe representing workers and how it's done in a home environment, and maybe then again go back to collective bargaining? But we don't need to touch on everything, but maybe Susan, could you talk a little bit about trade union organizing and how that might be affected by home working? Yeah.
Sure, it's kind of a tough question in terms of how do you organize when people are all isolated at home? Because when I looked up the statistics of for trade union members in the Republic, it's quite bleak. It's 518,000 people are members of a trade union in the Republic. It's just, which is under a quarter of employees, 24%. And basically in Northern Ireland, it's 196,000. And across in the UK, it's 6 million in total. So how do you organize? It's very difficult. What we've been trying to do is you're working with people who you're not meeting. We've been trying Zooms. In terms of how I've been organizing, I've been using Zoom meetings to meet and identify and catch any kind of health and safety slippages that they might be facing, and helping people, do casework is okay, but trying to organize and get people to work collectively has been exceptionally difficult. And it is, as I said, in real space, in virtual space, it's not as difficult, because you can travel to different workplaces, organize your meetings, get people on board, get them repped up, and work in that way. But we're in a situation now where people are at home, so it's divide and conquer by the employer. It's much easier,
Yeah,
so,
no, it's been difficult in our employment to get to new members, or say we meet a new member who's in a completely non-union workplace, and what do they want to do? They want trade union recognition, and the only way they can get that is with a huge majority, and then to force the employer in, and everybody feels quite frightened that they're very lucky to have a job at the moment. So organizing is a really tough thing to talk about. Does anybody else want to come in on organizing at all? And how we can build numbers, or how we can underline the value of trade unions to workers as a means to build power in their now disparate workplaces.
Could I just sorry, go ahead.
No, go on, Susan.
No, I was just going to add to that. Despite the fact that I was saying there's no silver bullet, we actually did recruit a hell of a lot of members, because we were going to trigger that S44, and walk out in January before lockdown did occur. So that has been COVID has, to some extent, driven people towards the unions as well, because they see that nobody else is going to protect them. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Sorry for cutting in.
I think it's a great point there. Jump in there. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd just say, for me, always, none of these things are by definition good or bad. They take place in a broader political and economic context that we don't necessarily control and we don't choose, but it's the one we operate in. So a lot of it is to do with how we use them and how they're utilized. And there are advantages actually in some ways to organizing workers in Ireland, because if you can get in front of them digitally, if you can talk to them, if you can listen to them, my experience is they're often a lot more willing to share their experience of work, because they're not scared of the manager who's down the 2 or 3 desks away, or they don't feel to some degree entrapped by their workplace, their physical workplace around them. So actually you can sit down, listen, and have some really good conversations and gain a great understanding of what people's experience of work is. And when they're at home, they feel just that little bit more comfortable, and you're chatting to them. And so there are advantages in terms of organizing workers, and there's also the host of issues that we just talked about in terms of psychological risks, and as well as physical risks, as well as the costs of home working, and that unions need to put up a bargaining agenda. And the important thing is to actually encourage participation of workers in resolving their own issues. So it's not about just the union being this abstract thing of me or Mehmet or whoever trying to bargain some kind of deal. It's actually about, well, what can workers do collectively? Can they start with the survey? Can they start with telephone calls to their colleagues to understand, does everyone feel the same way about this issue? And just build that sense of collectivity and collective ownership over the problem that will eventually lead to collective solutions. And I do think people like me who work for unions, what my job is to support that. It's to facilitate that. It's not to hinder it. It's not to see workplace activity as some kind of threat. It's actually to say, well, listen, how can I help you? Can I give you tools? Can I do some training? Can I facilitate this workplace activity in some way? And that's the mindset that unions, I think, need to adopt to successfully organize, even if it is now organizing digitally.
Yeah, I think it's a really key thing about trade unions, and that is feels countercultural anymore, is an anti-individualism, a collective sense that we need to work together. We need more, not longer Zoom calls, but more Zoom calls, and the ability to talk about these things. The phone calls, the surveys, bringing people together, bringing their experiences together and letting them hear them. Our May Day event was quite unique, I think, in People Before Profit. We held series of very short talks, 2-3 minute talks, and you heard all the different workers who've been working over the year of COVID and the different workplace struggles that they've had, from the Debenhams workers to small shops being put into liquidation, their fights against redundancy, fights for small increases, student nurses who got together and organized using media. But chiefly, all that comes back to conversations that individual workers had with each other. They took the initiative, they said, this isn't working for us, and they started complaining about it. And those complaints are justified, and that feels like it's something that's not correct. You're not supposed to complain. But without those complaints, we can't tell anything. It's why pain is important, so we can hear out. And look, we've also got a couple of questions coming in the chat. I just want to read them out. So one's from Michael O'Sullivan. He says, blatant class distinction is evident in many employments, such as public sector and elsewhere, where low-paid clerical admin staff are required to work full-time, while technical and so-called professionals can stay at home. And I think that goes back to the question of deepening inequality. It's very easy for that to be exacerbated. It's easy not to kind of balance those things out. I don't know if anybody wants to speak to that question, but there's one more comment here from Alexandra, saying the question of working from home during COVID definitely seems like one that will need to be returned to in the long term. Piling all one's paid and unpaid labor into the home clearly has far-reaching effects. Does the panel have any thoughts on the psychological and social effects of working in isolation? It comes in a bit with Gareth's question. I think this came in just before that. Gareth was talking about health and safety and mental health and social health as well. So there's. Is there anybody else who'd like to come in on trade union organizing there?
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, just very briefly. First of all, I think I fully agree with on the previous topic with what Gareth has said in terms of health and safety not being reduced to technology and material. It's about structural inequalities and indeed health and safety issues that causes on people, right? I think that's very important, and that's important to actually broaden it and deepen it in that sense, right? But I think in terms of working from home and workers' organizations, look, I mean, the reality is the workers' reality has to be the reality of the trade unions, of the trade union headquarters, because that's where really, that's what really matters. And I think there has to be an important and radical mindset shift, which also affects and positively changes the practices of trade union structures, right? Practices in terms of not obviously abandoning what trade unions are for, etc. Don't get me wrong, not on that one. But there are very practical realities emerging in our lives. And I think the mindset has to be shifted. And I think trade unions will have to really, really get much better. And that's very simple, it may sound, but it's very effective in utilizing technology to their advantages. Not only utilizing technology in terms of the headquarters of the unions, but also making sure that branch officers are equipped with the knowledge and understanding how to be effective using technology, indeed social media, indeed platforms like we are on at the moment, right? And I think that will actually give us some positive outcome from that. But I think the understanding of the reality of the workers isn't just a report or a press statement. It's actually turning your face at this very difficult time to the workers and learning from the workers who are on the ground, working from home or working somewhat from home and somewhat from the office, are in different sectors, and recognizing those realities firsthand and organically being part of that reality so that strategies can be driven out of this, and these strategies will make really sense to the workers and the wider membership. And I think that's going to be very, very important. And I think trade unions may sometimes learn from the employers as well, especially those employers who have really made great steps forward in terms of utilizing social media technologies, Facebook, and all of those things in a this could be a long debate, obviously, right? And I think we need to learn how we can actually jazz up or engagement platforms. The workplace canteen where the trade union official arrives and workers are expected to gather is not the case anymore. So that means we need to look at other ways of organizing and actually do it very sharply. And it may need training courses, right? It's now organizing in the era of working from home, organizing in the era of digital engagement. How do we actually make that happen and actually learn from the workers on the ground? It's going to be a long process, and it's one that is here to stay. So it's not a transition that's going to be reverted back to old days. It is the reality of many workers, and also trade unions will have to look at recruitment. There are many workers who are out there who are not trade unionized, but they are fighting to become union members, like Amazon workers, like the Google workers who protested against not necessarily bread and butter issues, but workplace bullying and discrimination, sexism, etc. in workplaces, right? And these are opportunities for trade unions to bring all these great new layers of workers into the trade unions. But relevance of with the realities of the workers is going to be a very important challenge for trade unions to recognize. The more relevant the trade unions are to the realities, the more workers will see trade unions as a place to go to and meet others and engage with others and organize with others.
Yeah. Thank you. That I think it's a crucial point there. There's I think I mentioned before that there's a trade union organizing course that's going on globally at the moment, and there's members of, I think, the Renters Union CATU, People for Profit, Sinn Féin, all involved in learning a bit more about organizing in different ways. The lead organizer on this is fairly famous in trade union organizer circles. Her name's Jane McAlevey, and she hates organizing online, thinks it doesn't work. But she last night was sitting in front of an audience of 4,000 trade union organizers from just about every country that I know of. So it can work in ways, but this is the first time that's happened. This has never happened before, but neither has COVID, and we need to take those steps. Trade unions can kind of sit back and say, we're going to wait for this, we're going to keep things safe, we don't know what's happening. But I think everybody else is moving, and staying still is a sign that something's not working. So we've got to keep that going. We need to keep moving on here. I just want to take one more maybe response here on this question of trade union organizing. Shanna, do you want to jump in here on this at all?
Thanks. I think that there are 2 points. I think the amendment made a very good point about looking at the worker experience. I think a lot of people are zoomed out, and so I'd say, and there are probably health and safety aspects of staring at a screen all day. I know it freaks me out. Like right now, I'm staring at my face, and that really freaks me out. So I have a staff member who she's complained of frequent migraines. So I've told her to take time off, or she's talking to her GP. But I think that there's scope in the experience of working from home to build upon that, to say unionization offers you a collective response to the pressures that your employer is putting on you to sit in front of a computer all day, because it's very sedentary. It's not extremely healthy, and it's not, going back to the question in the chat, it's actually very isolating, which has mental health effects. The contrast to the rosy picture in the survey that Galway conducted is that there's been a dramatic decline in the mental health across all age groups in the EU. So again, building upon that experience, it's very negative, but something has to be done about it. And this is not just people who've lost their job. This is across feeling isolated, depressed, anxious. So that's the flip side. So there's the specific experience of working at home, being isolated, sitting in front of a screen, which can't be healthy, very sedentary, gaining weight. But also that if you, like I said at the beginning, if you're asking people to work at home, then the employer then has an obligation to make sure that that home environment is good, which is a territory for unions to become involved in. That worker rights is not just about being on a factory floor or being in an office. It's actually about the whole quality of life that somebody has and their opportunities to improve that quality of life. I personally think the future of unions is intergenerational, and it's also taking going beyond connecting work to health benefits, to housing, to educational opportunities, to future opportunities, and to again, quality of life, capacity to participate in a political system. It's not focusing narrowly on work, but it's actually looking at the bigger picture.
Yeah, this is something that's reflected around a lot of conversations in trade unions. And I know it sounds like a kind of a boring thing for people who aren't active trade union members. If you're just a card carrying, I have to be a member of the trade union member, it's different. But if you're passionately involved in workplace struggles and you see that as an important part of your life, whether you consider it political or not, you talk about trade unions and what they're going to be doing, how they're going to survive. And like Susan, you look at the numbers and you see them declining, and you're baffled at why. Unions are a major way that the majority of the planet has to push back and really be political. It's one of the only democratic venues that's open to migrants in Ireland. They don't have a vote, and this is where they can get a vote, and they can take it and use a political voice here. And so they should use that. I think the examples of the Chicago Teachers Union, which has come up a lot over the last few years, where they locked in with the community and said, look, we're going to lose this if we lose our students' families. If they don't support this strike, why are we not supporting their issues? And they brought them on board with them. I think there's so much to be learned from recent wins in trade union battles that didn't narrowly focus and didn't stick to the rules, but broke the rules and went outside that and rebelled a little bit. They bring a lot of power, and they build power for unions. They build power for workers, which is what we need to do beyond defending. We need to do some new things. So I think Shana, you've got a couple of good points there. And I think this has been a really successful kind of talk here. What I would like to see is something to happen beyond this. It's great to have a conversation like this, but I'd love to see something build beyond this. Are there things that trade unions are doing right now, Gareth, that maybe you could tell us about that are building bigger links? I mean, ICTU's there, and obviously there's somebody who's probably thinking about how do we build more politically. I mean, obviously people, the for-profit wants to encourage its members who are highly politicized to join trade unions, be more active parts in trade unions, and they want to be welcomed inside trade unions. Are political people welcomed inside trade unions, number one? Do you think that they are? And number two, are there things that trade unions are doing politically now that you can kind of talk to maybe a non-union member about that can bring a little bit more interest to it?
Yeah, I mean, so like our political people welcome in trade unions. Well, trade unions are a combination of lots of politics.
Yeah,
lots of politics, from Fine Gael to the Communist Party. You know, there's every color and brand of political persuasion in trade unions, and that's sometimes one of the mistaken beliefs, is that trade unions are some kind of this left radical. You know, when the electorate was voting Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael in for decades, why would a mass organisation of 600,000 workers be way out on the left? It wouldn't make sense. Of course, it broadly reflected the political views of society more generally. And yes, it still kind of does today. Now, trade unions have a politicizing role and have the ability to politicize, which is important, because anytime you get into struggle, anytime you get into campaigns, anytime you get into your employer, it has a qualitative impact on your psyche and your understanding of the world around you, which politicizes you. So the more unions are involved in struggle, you'll notice a correlation with political activism more generally in society, membership of political parties, that kind of thing. So whether they're welcome or not to certain political views, I think is kind of irrelevant. For me, if you work, join your union and get involved in your union. And that way you begin to shape actually the politics of that trade union because you're active in it. And there's lots of things people can do. One of the great things we're seeing over the last sort of 4 or 5 years is a real burst or growth in young people struggling and being involved, and loads of new sectors that in tech and in games and in all sorts, delivery drivers, Uber drivers, all that kind of stuff, beginning now to find their collective voice and organize. And that's sometimes in traditional unions, as in the case of FSU and some of our newer members who are organizing. But then in other times, it's in completely new structures and new forms of trade unions. I think if you look at London, for example, there's 4 or 5 different new unions that have emerged, often through migrant struggle, for example, over the last sort of decade or so. So workers are finding their voice. Best thing you can do is talk to your colleagues and listen to your colleagues and understand what's going on, and then talk to your union official and ask, can we do something? Can we do a survey? And it's simple things, it's simple tools. Like the tool in and of itself is only a tool, but it's the act of actually engaging with other people and turning what was the thing that was affecting you into something that actually loads of people care about. And then it becomes, the solution is not take a grievance, which is a very individual sort of form of activity. The solution now becomes, well, will we write a petition, all 20 of us, or will we do something even more, you know? But it's about workers getting involved and then trying to turn what they might think is an individual issue into a collective issue, which probably, if you're suffering some of the psychological impacts that people have talked about as an impact of homework, of remote working, lots of other people are too. So don't take that burden on yourself. Talk to colleagues and turn it into a collective struggle. So I think there's I just encourage people to get involved in that trade union, whether you necessarily feel welcome or not. Get involved, shape it, and you will find a lot more like-minded people in there and in your workplace.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely dead on there. It is what we can find that's a collective grievance, a collective problem, a collective issue, and how we deal with that collectively, which is really what a trade union is. And whether you have a trade union card in your pocket or whether you're just talking to people, all of that is positive moves politically and collectively. There was something you said in there that reflected something that Mehmet was talking about. But Mehmet, do you want to come back in on this before we're going to have to close up pretty soon here? Anything else that you'd like to bring in, or anyone else there? Mehmet, go ahead first if you like.
Yeah, very, very briefly. First of all, I think we do agree, I think collectively, that the working from home is a new reality, and it has somewhat plenty of positive aspects to it, but there are also aspects that have to be dealt with very seriously, and workers' rights and all of those have to be taken care of. So I think let's bring more positives out of it, and that won't naturally happen unless we fight for these things. That's very important. Secondly, I think as trade unions, it is not a fact of life that working from home should be a factor in no engagement with trade unions or less membership or no engagement with workers. We have to polish our tools, we have to learn new tools, and we have to learn new skills and say this is the reality. When email was the first time a reality of communication, there were organizations who insisted still sending fax because that's what they had done forever and that's what they wanted to do forever. There were mentality of holding on to. So now, I mean, everything is on email. So be it if some meetings have to happen over the Zoom for another period, but there will be also changes to pandemic. They'll be back to physical public environments, and trade union buildings, trade union facilities could be open up to workers to organize their social gatherings, to organize their political gatherings, to organize their, if their workplace doesn't exist anymore, the trade union facilities could be the places where workers come together as branches and they're served the old sandwich and a cup of tea while they're having their workplace meeting. Trade unions could organize logistics and transport, all of those things, because let's face it, no members, no trade unions, no trade union salaries. That's the reality, right? That is what it is after all. You need people who pay 1960 or 2150 into a bank account for collective fight. That's very important, right? But also we need to understand there are people who still have to bake the bread. There are still who still have to shelve the supermarket shelves. There are still people who need to cut the grass on public parks, maintain the city, run the electricity network, and indeed serve us when we go shopping. So it's not as if everyone will be stuck in workplaces, home, right? The workers will be, as it was, diverse in their nature, in their practices. And I think working from home shouldn't be a fear factor for unions to actually look at the wider perspective and wider reality of the workers. Thank God those people will still exist to run our cities and make our bread and make sure vegetables and fruit are stuck on supermarket shelves, because these are the frontline workers. And that's where sometimes the energy comes from as well. And I think trade unions will need to look at actually how to defend these workers. And I like to very silently mention something. Debenham workers and the relationship between trade union bureaucracy and the Debenham workers. That relationship wasn't a shining star, if you ask me. They fought for 300 days, more than 300 days, and I don't think there was sufficient at all support, solidarity, and encouragement coming from the higher authorities in the trade union structure, and that is something we need to change.
You know, I think trade unions are certainly not perfect, and they're certainly not going to become perfect any more than any of our political parties or indeed our workplaces. And it's a constant struggle, and we need to be engaged in that in a democratic way. I think one of the things that kind of Mehmet and Gareth both brought up there is the fact that there's got to be something new that comes out of trade unions after COVID. How are we going to when we look back at COVID, what are trade unions going to all look back and say, we learned this from the period of COVID. This is what we learned how to do better. This taught us that. It's difficult to organize. There's a lot of really interesting stuff that came out of here. I'd love to go through this. I think what I'll do is I'll just write up a post tomorrow and put it up on the People Before Profit site before the end of the week. Just kind of going through some of the points that have come out here. We'll put a recording up on here as well. Susan, Shana, do you want to come in with any final points there?
Well, I just want to thank Mehmet and Gareth and Shona have covered most of it, but I think that basically trade unions at this stage, basically Mehmet has made some very, very good points, and we do need to capitalize on what we have. And I was at the meeting yesterday along with John at the Organise for Power, and I've been to strike school as well before, and you got 4,000 members on here, so from all over the globe, so it could become a tool, and we should utilize it more effectively to kind of galvanize members. One thing that does concern me, and I didn't get to talk about it earlier, and I don't want to take up too much time, is that risk assessments. The employers has a responsibility to carry out risk assessments, and that includes risk assessments at home as well. And I know that it hasn't been done in any of the schools that I've been engaging with, so that was just another issue. Basically, I think we just need to kind of learn and move forward, and unions as well need to kind of maybe tap into what their grassroots activists want as well. That's me. I'm done.
Oh, and I think there's something that was said there about how we need to kind of watch what's happening in the workplaces and make sure that our unions are pushing as fast and faster. If we're going to keep organizing, we've got to move faster than our employers. We've got to move faster than the workplaces, and grab every opportunity and learn every new thing we can, and keep going forward. There's a lot of people that are unorganized out there, and let's keep reaching out. Shana, any final points there from yourself?
I think that unions have a role. Again, I'm going back to Mehmet again. That the segregation in society that's based on if you work in retail or hospitality, if you work in a public-facing job, that will probably be low paid and not permanent, not benefits, and you're going back to poor accommodation, or you live with your parents. We want to make sure that I think unions have a role in continuing to highlight that we don't want a very segregated, very unequal society going forward, and that the government needs to do something about that instead of employers. I think that that's critical for unions to focus on that.
All right, so we are going to leave this Facebook chat. This is being, of course, broadcast live on Facebook at the moment. A couple of comments have come in, not loads there, but we find that there can be a number of comments that come in afterwards as people are watching it coming in. And I'd invite anybody who does watch this to throw in a question and to engage. to engage. Number one, with your local for-profit branch. We'd love to have more active trade unionists coming into meetings and talking about their struggles. We've recently invited and welcomed into membership a couple of members from places that have been out on strike. We've been out to visit the people in the Hovis factory that are out on strike this week. We're out last week. Fantastic video came out of the Queen's University creche workers coming down the road. I don't know if you've seen that. It's a beautiful video of them marching down the road with their flags out, meeting the Hovis workers at their place, and that kind of solidarity between different types of workers who recognize it's the same struggle, the same thing that we saw in the May Day protest, the same thing that we're seeing in that Organizing for Power course, the same thing that we're seeing in the workers who are respecting the pickets at ESB networks, even when it's not their own union that's out on strike. That's a beautiful act of solidarity, and it's a wonderful thing to see. It's a big risk. I was down at one of their pickets down at one of the workplaces this morning handing out some leaflets, and a worker who was in one of the other unions said, "I've lost 4 days' pay because of these pickets, and it's not even my union. I'll never break a picket." And I was so proud to be standing there talking to a guy like that who has those kind of principles. And it's that kind of stuff that makes being a trade union member a really beautiful thing. They're gonna, I hope, keep that fight up and win that. The Debenhams workers that Mehmet mentioned are exemplary. They're going to go down in labor history in Ireland, and I'm glad to say that people for profit found themselves on the right side of that struggle. We stayed with them and kept supporting them, and we'll keep supporting them. And I think that everybody in Ireland has a soft spot for the Debenhams workers and understands what they're going through. Is something. It's a collective public sacrifice that's happening in those workers, and it's wrong. And the government can absolutely step in at any time. They've had hundreds of opportunities at this point, it seems. So any way that you can get in to support them and the bills that are coming in on that, and any struggles that are coming in to follow, let's do that. But for now, I think we'd like to close up and say thank you to each and every one of our guests here: Gareth, Shana, Mehmet, and Susan. Susan with no face, but still lots of heart there. So I really appreciate everybody coming in, spending the evening here. Yeah, it's the advantage. You can do that kind of stuff when you're doing a restream from home here. So hopefully people will still be using this kind of stuff in the future.
I think, John, I think also another message, sorry, I'm jumping in there, for all workers from home is, don't feel isolated, don't feel alone, don't feel lonely. Contact your colleagues, contact your fellow trade union members, and indeed contact your union officials should you have that need. And I think make sure that you get the support and solidarity and any help that you may need in whichever way it might be. I think this is a new era, and I think we need to up our game in solidarity, big time.
Yeah, and if you aren't a member of a trade union and you'd like to find out more and you're just watching this, I would encourage you to contact People for Profit's Trade Union Department. And you can just email TU for trade union at pbp.ie. Get in touch, tell us what the situation is. I'll probably be in touch later that day, and we'll be talking about it. It's happened for a few different workers, and we've managed to help them find a union, rejuvenate what skeleton of a union they might have had there, or start something up in their workplace and bring that to the attention of a bigger union or somebody who can help. And we did that with some Deliveroo workers this year. We did that with some cinema workers this year. And there's a bunch of different people that we can reach out and help. We've got the resources, and all political parties should be helping their members and helping people in the communities that they work in to find trade unions, reactivate trade unions, and re-radicalize trade unions. So I just want to say thank you one more time to everybody who came out and listened to this tonight, and to our guests. Thanks very much, and have a great evening. Solidarity.
Thank you. Take care.